They held the will reading at the top of the skyscraper my grandfather built. My cousins got the company, the real estate, the stock portfolio. I got a dusty old book from his library that everyone thought was a joke. 6 months later, when the bankruptcy notices hit their desks, they found out the book was the only thing that was real. Have you ever had a moment where everyone's laughing at you, but you have a secret so powerful it would shatter their world? This story is about the quiet satisfaction of knowing something they don't. If you've ever kept a game-changing secret, let me know in the comments with "I know the feeling." And subscribe for more stories about the underdogs who win in the end. The lawyer's voice was dry as the dust collecting on the forgotten ledgers in the corner of the office. He stood behind my grandfather's massive oak desk, a desk I'd only ever seen the old man behind, and read the terms of the will as if he were listing grocery items. The room, perched on the 60th floor of the Prentice Tower, was a glass-walled cage of suppressed excitement. Outside, the city of Atherton stretched out like a circuit board of ambition and avarice, a view my grandfather, Silas Prentice, had built his empire to enjoy. My aunt, Gwendolyn, sat ramrod straight, her designer dress so impeccably tailored it seemed to defy the very concept of wrinkles. Her husband, Howard, kept nervously adjusting his tie, his eyes darting towards the documents in the lawyer's hands as if he could read the dollar signs from across the room.
Then there were my cousins. Pierce, the eldest, had already practiced his humble yet capable expression in the mirror, I was sure of it. He was leaning forward, elbows on knees, the picture of a responsible heir. His sister, Bianca, was subtly checking her reflection in her phone screen, probably already drafting the Instagram post announcing her new role as heiress to the Prentice fortune. And me? I was in the back, in a chair that felt like it was meant for visitors, not family. I wore my one good suit, the one I reserved for job interviews and funerals. It smelled faintly of mothballs and desperation. To my daughter, Gwendolyn, and her husband, Howard, I bequeath the primary residence in the Crestview Hills, along with the art collection and the portfolio of municipal bonds. A sharp, satisfied intake of breath from Gwendolyn. Howard actually rubbed his hands together. To my grandson, Pierce Prentice, I leave the entirety of Prentice Global Industries, its subsidiaries, and all controlling shares, with the provision that he retains current executive staff for a period of no less than 2 years. Pierce didn't smile. He merely nodded, a CEO accepting a report, but I saw the triumph in the set of his jaw. He'd won. To my granddaughter, Bianca Prentice, I leave the commercial real estate holdings, including the Prentice Tower itself and the venture capital fund. Bianca's phone finally went dark. A genuine, dazzling smile broke across her face. She whispered, "The tower," looking around the room as if seeing it for the first time as her personal property.
I felt a hollow ache in my chest. This was it. The formalization of what I'd always known. I was an outsider. My mother, Silas's younger daughter, had chosen a life of teaching and quiet contentment over the cutthroat world of business. She'd married my father, a kind-hearted mechanic, and they'd built a life filled with love, but devoid of stock options. They died in a car accident when I was 20, and Silas had paid for my education with a check that felt more like an obligation than a gift. I'd become a graphic designer, a creative, a term my family uttered with the same tone they'd use for unemployed dreamer. Mr. Albright cleared his throat. The room's attention, warm and self-congratulatory, settled on me for the first time. It was a gaze of pitying curiosity. "And to my grandson, Kyle," he said, and I saw the corners of Pierce's mouth twitch. "He leave the contents of my personal study, specifically the item he once expressed interest in, the 1921 first edition of The Anatomy of Corporate Structure." Silence. Then a snort from Bianca. She tried to cover it with a cough, but it was too late. Pierce leaned back, a slow, wide smile spreading across his face. "A book, Kyle. Grandfather left you a book." He shook his head, the picture of benevolent condescension. "I guess he knew you'd appreciate the aesthetics." "It's a very rare volume," Mr. Albright added, though its rarity was its only value. "I'm sure it is," Gwendolyn said, her voice dripping with a syrup of false sympathy. "Silas always said you had your head in the clouds, dear. Maybe this will help you keep it there." The weight of their collective dismissal was a physical pressure. They had skyscrapers, corporations, millions. I had a dusty old book. I stood up, my face a mask of calm I didn't feel. "Thank you, Mr. Albright, if that's all." "That is the entirety of the will," he confirmed, closing the folder with a definitive snap. As I walked out of the office, their whispers followed me, sharp and needling. What did he expect? He never had the drive. At least he got something. I collected the book from my grandfather's study. It was heavy, bound in faded green leather with gold leaf lettering that was flaking off. It looked every bit the useless relic they thought it was, but as I held it, I remembered the last time I'd seen my grandfather, 3 weeks before he died. He'd called me to his study, not the corporate one, but his private one at the old estate. He'd been staring at this very book. "You're the only one who ever asked about this, Cale," he'd said, his voice raspy. "The only one who thought to look past the balance sheets. Remember, the most valuable treasures are often hidden in plain sight. They're just waiting for the right person to see the pattern." At the time, I thought he was just being sentimental. Now, clutching the book to my chest in the elevator descending from their world, I felt a flicker of something else. Not hope, not yet, but a spark of curiosity. The mockery didn't end at the will reading. A week later, a package arrived at my small downtown apartment. It was a brand new, glossy copy of The Anatomy of Corporate Structure. The attached note, on Prentice Global letterhead, read, "In case the first one is too fragile to actually read. Thought you might need a more accessible version. Dash Pierce." I threw the new book in the recycling bin. Then, that evening, with the sounds of the city filtering through my open window, I sat down at my drafting table and opened my grandfather's gift. The paper was thick and creamy. The text was dense, dry prose about corporate law and early 20th century business practices. It was, as my family believed, objectively boring. I skimmed through it, feeling a pang of disappointment. Was this really it? A final cryptic lesson that amounted to nothing? Then, as I gently turned a page near the middle, I saw it. A single faint line of handwriting in the margin. My grandfather's handwriting. It was just a sequence of numbers and letters. A47, R19, L83. My heart skipped a beat.
I started flipping through the book more carefully, my designer's eye scanning not just the text, but the negative space, the margins, the patterns. And there they were, faint, almost imperceptible marks. On another page, a small star next to a paragraph about subsidiary holdings. On another, a tiny arrow drawn in pencil pointing to a specific word. It wasn't a book, it was a map. The next 6 months were a secret double life. By day, I was Cale, the struggling graphic designer, taking freelance jobs to pay the rent, fielding the occasional check-in call from Bianca that was really just a pretext to boast about her latest acquisition. By night, I was an archaeologist, deciphering my grandfather's code. The clues in the book were fiendishly clever. The alphanumeric sequences corresponded to page, line, and word numbers in other, more obscure books in his library, which I had to hunt down in secondhand shops and online auctions. The stars and arrows pointed to specific legal clauses or historical examples that, when pieced together, formed a blueprint, not for a company, but for an asset. Silas Prentice hadn't just built Prentice Global. During the economic turmoil of the 1980s, he had quietly, methodically begun siphoning a percentage of the company's profits into a separate, private venture. He'd done it through a labyrinth of shell companies and offshore trusts, all documented in a code only he, and now I, understood. He called it the Aegis Project. It was his life's insurance policy, his true legacy, completely separate from the bloated, increasingly unstable corporate empire he'd left to Pierce. Prentice Global, the book revealed, was a gilded cage. It was leveraged to the hilt, reliant on a few key contracts that were about to expire, and vulnerable to market shifts that Silas had seen coming a mile away. He'd given Pierce the throne, but the kingdom was built on quicksand. The final clue led me to a safety deposit box in a small private bank in Zurich. The key had been taped inside the back cover of the book, hidden beneath the end paper. When I opened the box, there were no stacks of cash. There was a single, sealed envelope. Inside was a letter and a series of account numbers.
Cale, the letter began. If you are reading this, you have proven what I always suspected. You have the patience to see the details and the vision to understand the whole. You looked at an old book and saw a puzzle, while your cousins looked at a billion-dollar company and saw only a prize. Prentice Global was the shell. Aegis is the pearl. It is a fully self-sustaining investment fund, currently valued at just over $900 million. It is yours, outright. Do with it what you think is right. And remember, the best revenge is not destruction. It's creation. Silas. I sat in the sterile, quiet bank room, the letter trembling in my hand. $900 million. The number was so large it was abstract. It wasn't money, it was power. It was validation. The hollow ache I'd carried out of the Prentice Tower was filled with a roaring, terrifying, exhilarating sense of purpose. They had laughed at the book. They had laughed at me. But the joke was suddenly, profoundly on them. For a week, I did nothing. The numbers in the Swiss account were a ghost in the machine, a theoretical force I was too terrified to unleash. I'd lie awake at night, the hum of the city a constant reminder of the empire my cousins were gleefully driving into the ground, and the silent, colossal power I now held in my hands. $900 million. It was a weapon of mass construction or destruction. My grandfather's final words echoed in my mind. The best revenge is not destruction. It's creation.
But what was I supposed to create? I was a graphic designer who lived in a 500-square-foot apartment with a persistent leak under the kitchen sink. I didn't know the first thing about managing a fortune, about corporate raids, about being the silent hand that moves the market. Then the email came. It was from Pierce, sent to the entire family distribution list. The subject line: Prentice Global Quarterly Update. A new era of growth.
The body was a masterpiece of corporate spin, full of phrases like strategic repositioning and streamlining operations. But buried in the third paragraph was the truth. As part of our commitment to maximizing shareholder value, we will be consolidating our creative and marketing divisions, resulting in a necessary reduction of force. My phone buzzed immediately. It was Maya, a brilliant art director I'd worked with on a freelance project for Prentice Global just 6 months ago. KL, did you see the email? She said, her voice tight with panic. They're cleaning house. The entire in-house design team is getting axed. They're outsourcing everything to some cheap agency overseas. Sarah just bought a house. Leo's wife is pregnant. What are we going to do? The hollow feeling returned, but this time it was filled with a cold, clarifying anger. This wasn't just about me anymore. Pierce wasn't just an arrogant cousin. He was a bad steward. He was sacrificing people's livelihoods, the very human capital that had built the company, for a few points on a quarterly report. He was everything my grandfather had despised in modern business. That was the moment the spark ignited. I wasn't just KL, the overlooked grandson. I was the heir to Aegis, and it was time to build. My first move was strategic, not emotional. I couldn't just storm into Prentice Global and write a check. That would reveal my hand and make me a target. I needed a proxy, a vehicle. Using a portion of the Aegis funds, I created an anonymous LLC, registered in Delaware, with a name so bland it was invisible: North Star Holdings. I hired a sharp, discreet corporate lawyer I found through a trusted contact, a woman named Isabel Rossi, who asked no questions about the source of my funds and had a reputation for ruthless efficiency. "What is the acquisition strategy for North Star?" she asked during our first encrypted video call. "We're looking for undervalued assets with strong foundational teams but weak leadership," I said, my voice steady, surprising me. "Companies that have lost their way. We provide the capital and the vision to help them find it again." My first target wasn't Prentice Global. It was a small, struggling tech firm called OptiLogic that Prentice supplied with proprietary components. I dug into their records. They were bleeding money, but their core software was brilliant. Pierce saw them as a failing client. I saw them as a key piece on the board. North Star bought a controlling stake in OptiLogic for a song. I didn't fire the CEO. I met with him through Isabel and laid out a plan. We would invest in his R&D, pay down his debt, and give him the runway to finish his next-generation platform. The only condition was that he had to sever his exclusive supply contract with Prentice Global and put it out to bid. The look on the man's face, a mixture of shock, relief, and renewed hope, was my first taste of real power. Not the power to destroy, but the power to enable. The loss of the OptiLogic contract was the first crack in the Prentice facade. I heard about it through Bianca, who called me, her voice shrill with annoyance. "Can you believe it? Some no-name investment firm just poached one of our oldest clients? Pierce is furious. He says it's a blip, but it's going to mess up our numbers for the quarter." "That's a shame," I said, my voice neutral as I sketched a logo concept for a new startup I was funding through North Star. Meanwhile, I was building.
I used Aegis to quietly acquire a boutique architectural firm that Prentice had undervalued and sold off. I bought a chain of small family-owned manufacturing plants in the Midwest that Pierce had considered unprofitable relics. I didn't just save them, I modernized them, invested in their workers, and gave them a new sense of purpose. We began producing the components OptiLogic needed at a higher quality and lower cost than Prentice ever could.
I was creating my own ecosystem, a silent, efficient machine operating in the shadow of the crumbling Prentice empire. My days were a whirlwind. I still lived in my small apartment, a deliberate choice to keep myself grounded. But my life was now a series of encrypted calls, strategic meetings with Isabel, and late nights analyzing financials. I was learning, adapting, and thriving in a way I never had as a graphic designer. This was my canvas now, and the medium was commerce itself. The climax came 8 months after I'd opened the safety deposit box. Prentice Global, starved of key contracts and bleeding from Pierce's poor management, was on the verge of collapse. Their stock was in free fall. Rumors of a hostile takeover were swirling. I received a summons. Not a request, a summons. It was from Gwendolyn. The entire family was to assemble at the Crestview Hills estate for an emergency meeting. I arrived last. The opulent mansion felt different now. Not imposing, but fragile. The air was thick with fear. Gwendolyn and Howard looked aged. Bianca was silent, her phone untouched on the marble coffee table. Pierce stood by the fireplace, his face ashen, the picture of defeated arrogance. "We're finished," Howard said, his voice hollow. "The board is forcing Pierce out. The vultures are circling. We're going to have to sell the company for parts just to avoid total bankruptcy." "There has to be something we can do," Bianca wailed. "What about the venture capital fund? Can't we use that?" "It's already leveraged to the hilt," Pierce snapped, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "There's no one left to call, no one with the capital and the vision to save this."
It was my cue. The moment I had both dreaded and, in my secret heart, anticipated. "There might be someone," I said, my voice quiet but cutting through the tension in the room. They all turned to look at me, their expressions a mixture of irritation and faint, pathetic hope. "Who?" Gwendolyn demanded. "One of your artist friends?" "No," I said, meeting her gaze evenly. "An investment firm, North Star Holdings." Pierce scoffed. "I've heard of them. They're a bottom feeder. They bought OptiLogic. They're probably behind this whole mess." "They're well capitalized, and they have a history of turning around distressed companies," I said, repeating the line I'd practiced with Isabel. "I've done some freelance design work for them. I could set up a meeting." The desperation in the room was a tangible force. They were drowning, and I was throwing them a line, not knowing it was attached to the ship I commanded. "Set up the meeting," Gwendolyn said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Today." The meeting was arranged for that afternoon, in the very boardroom of the Prentice Tower where they had mocked me. I arrived early with Isabel Rossi. We sat on one side of the long, polished table. When my family filed in, they looked broken. Pierce couldn't even meet my eyes. Then, the CEO of North Star Holdings entered. It was me. I had put on the same suit I'd worn to the will reading, but this time it felt like armor. I walked in, not as the dismissed grandson, but as the architect of their salvation. The silence was absolute. It was so profound I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Gwendolyn's mouth hung open. Howard looked like he'd been slapped. Bianca stared, her brain seemingly unable to process the information.
Pierce was the first to speak. His face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and then a dawning, horrified understanding. "You?" he whispered, the word of venomous accusation. "North Star is you?" "It is," I said, my voice calm. "My grandfather didn't leave me a book, Pierce. He left me a key. He left me Aegis. He left me $900 million and a lesson about what real value is." I let that hang in the air, watching the truth dismantle their reality. You did this?" Pierce stammered, rising from his chair. "You sabotaged your own family?" "I didn't sabotage you," I replied coolly. "You did that yourself. I simply built something better with the resources my grandfather entrusted to me. While you were leveraging the tower, I was acquiring the land it stands on. While you were firing creative teams, I was building the most innovative design and manufacturing network in the country." I gestured to Isabel, who placed a single document on the table. "This is North Star's offer for Prentice Global. We will assume all debt. We will retain every employee you were planning to terminate. We will restructure, reinvest, and restore this company to what my grandfather intended it to be. In exchange, the Prentice family will relinquish all shares and executive positions." It was a merciful offer, far more merciful than they deserved. It was the creation my grandfather had asked for. I wasn't destroying their legacy. I was saving it from them. Gwendolyn began to cry, silent, defeated tears. Howard put his head in his hands. Bianca just stared at the document as if it were written in a foreign language. Pierce looked at me, and for a single, unguarded moment, I saw not the arrogant CEO, but the scared boy who had always tried too hard to impress a grandfather who saw right through him. "You win," he said, his voice ragged. "This was never about winning against you, Pierce," I said, and I meant it. It was about proving something to myself, and about honoring my grandfather's trust. They signed the papers. There was no fight left in them. As I stood to leave, the rightful owner of the room and everything in it, Bianca finally found her voice. "The book," she said softly. "It was all in the book?" I paused at the door and looked back at them. The broken dynasty gathered around the table their greed had shattered. "No," I said. "It was always in the silence. You were all so busy making noise about what you were getting, you never stopped to listen to what he was really saying." I walked out of the Prentice Tower that day, not as an outsider, but as its architect. The game was over, and I had just begun to play. Walking out of the Prentice Tower that day felt like shedding a skin. The weight of their expectations, their dismissals, their pity, it all sloughed off, leaving behind a new, steadier version of myself. The city didn't look the same from the sidewalk. I wasn't looking up at the glittering spires of a world that excluded me. I was standing firm in a city where I now held the keys. The legal transfer of Prentice Global to North Star Holdings was a complex, month-long process handled with icy precision by Isabel Rossi. My family, stripped of their titles and shares, retreated from public view. The society pages that had once chronicled Bianca's every purchase now ran brief, somber pieces about the restructuring of a classic American empire. The silence from them was deafening, but it was a silence I welcomed.
My first act as the effective owner was not to issue a press release or host a triumphant party. It was to walk into the headquarters of the newly christened Aegis Ventures, I'd retired the Prentice name, burying the ghost, and call an all-hands meeting. The auditorium was packed with nervous faces. These were the people Pierce had been ready to discard. The accountants, the junior analysts, the marketing team, the IT staff, the human machinery that kept the lights on. I stood on the stage, no suit, just the same kind of jeans and button-down I'd always worn. The whispers were audible. That's him? The graphic designer? The grandson? I know you've been through a period of uncertainty, I began, my voice echoing slightly in the large room. You've been told your divisions were redundant, your roles were expendable. I'm here to tell you that was the previous management's first and biggest mistake. I saw back straighten, eyes narrowed, listening intently. My name is Cale. My grandfather, Silas, built this company on a belief in ingenuity and hard work. Somewhere along the way, we lost that. We started valuing spreadsheets over people, quarterly reports over long-term vision. That ends today. I laid out the plan. No mass layoffs. Instead, a company-wide profit-sharing initiative. A dedicated innovation fund for employees to pitch their own projects. The reinstatement of the entire in-house creative team, with a mandate to rebuild the brand from the inside out. I announced that OptiLogic and our newly acquired manufacturing plants were now sister companies, creating a closed-loop, synergistic network. When one part of this ecosystem thrives, we all thrive. Your success is no longer separate from the company's success. It is the company's success. The applause started slowly, then built into a roaring, cathartic wave. It wasn't for me, not really. It was for their own salvaged futures, for the validation of their worth. Maya, the art director, was crying. Later, she would tell me she'd already packed her desk.
The months that followed were the most demanding and rewarding of my life. I wasn't a dictator in a corner office. I was a conductor, moving between the different sections of my orchestra. I spent days on the factory floors in the Midwest, learning about hydraulic systems and supply chain logistics from people who had been working them for 40 years. I sat with the coders at OptiLogic, their energy infectious as they demoed the revolutionary software my investment had allowed them to complete. I learned that true leadership wasn't about being the smartest person in the room. It was about listening to the person who was. About a year after the takeover, I received an email. It was from Pierce. Cale, it began, stiff and formal. I would appreciate the opportunity to meet. There are things I need to say. I'll be at the old botanical gardens at noon tomorrow, if you're willing. The gardens were a place our grandfather had loved, a quiet oasis of green in the heart of the city. I found Pierce on a bench by the koi pond, looking out of place in his expensive casual wear. He looked older. The perpetual smirk was gone, replaced by a quiet weariness. He didn't look at me when I sat down. I spent the first 6 months hating you, he said, his voice low. I thought you were a schemer, a hypocrite who played the long game to make us all look like fools. He finally turned to me. But then I started reading the business reports. I saw what you were doing with the company, the employee ownership fund, the investment in the old manufacturing plants. You didn't strip it for parts. You healed it. He shook his head, a gesture of profound confusion. Why? After what we did to you, why not just burn it all down? Because grandfather was right, I said simply. Destruction is easy. It's the default setting of anger. Creation is hard. It requires patience and faith. He didn't give me that money for revenge. He gave it to me as a test to see if I could build something he could be proud of.
Pierce was silent for a long time, watching the orange and white koi swirl in the water.
He knew, didn't he? He knew I would run it into the ground. I think he hoped you wouldn't, I said, not unkindly, but he knew your vision only extended to the next earnings call. He needed someone who could see the next decade. I'm working, Pierce said, the words clearly foreign and uncomfortable on his tongue. At a private equity firm, an analyst. I have to actually analyze things now. It's humbling. I heard, I said. I also heard you're good at it. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. He hadn't expected me to keep tabs on him. I have a proposition for you. The venture capital wing of Aegis needs a director. It's a real job with real responsibility. The pay is good, but not obscene. And you'd be evaluated on the long-term success of your investments, not just the initial returns. I think you could be good at it. I think you've learned what not to do. He stared at me, utterly stunned. This was the final unthinkable move in the chess game. Not checkmate with a triumphant slam of the piece, but an offer of a new game on a different board. Why? He whispered. Because you're family, I said, standing up. And because creation is harder than destruction. Let me know if you're interested.
Bianca took longer. The loss of her social status was a deeper wound. But about 2 years in, she showed up at my office, unannounced. She looked different, softer. She was wearing jeans, and her hair was in a simple ponytail. "I'm bored," she announced, dropping into the chair across from my desk. "And I'm tired of being a punchline. You gave Pierce a job. I want one." "What can you do?" I asked, genuinely curious. "I can sell," she said, a spark of her old fire in her eyes. "I spent my entire life selling an image. I know how to create desire, how to build a narrative around a product. Let me handle the branding for the new consumer division. I know I can do it." I took a chance, and to her credit and my immense surprise, she was brilliant. Freed from the pressure of maintaining a hollow personal brand, she poured all her cunning and social intelligence into her work. She connected with consumers on a level the old, stodgy Prentice marketing team never could. She found her purpose, not in being an heiress, but in being a master of her craft. Today, Aegis Ventures is more robust and valuable than Prentice Global ever was. We're a model of conscious capitalism, studied in business schools. I still teach a graphic design seminar once a week at a local community college. It keeps me honest. My students, who sometimes recognize me from Forbes covers, get a kick out of it. I never opened the bottle of 1945 Bordeaux my grandfather had left in his cellar with a note that said, "For the CEO." I sold it at auction and used the money to fund scholarships for first-generation college students studying trades and arts. The real treasure, the unopened bottle I keep on my shelf, is that original green leather book. Its value is incalculable, but not for the reason anyone would think. It's a reminder that the most profound truths are often hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone with the patience to look. It's a testament to the power of quiet observation over loud ambition.
Every Sunday, I still visit the botanical garden. Sometimes I see Pierce there, and we talk about work, about life, in a way we never could as children. The bitterness is gone, replaced by a mutual, hard-won respect. My grandfather's game was indeed the longest I've ever seen. He didn't just leave me a fortune. He left me a crucible. He forced me to prove my character, to discover my own strength, and to learn the most valuable lesson of all.
that the ultimate power lies not in what you take, but in what you are trusted to build, and whom you choose to lift up with you. They thought the board was made of money and stock tickers. He knew the real board was made of people, of legacy, of time. And he positioned me as the only piece who understood the difference. So what about you? Have you ever been given something that seemed small and insignificant, only to find out later it was the key to everything? What's the most surprising twist your own life has thrown at you? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this tale of quiet triumph resonated with you, do me a favor and subscribe to the channel. There are more stories of secrets, legacies, and the underdogs who win by rewriting the rules. Thanks for listening.